I think everyone now in medicine is serving the underserved. There's so much changing in medicine. There's so much instability with global economic factors and regulatory things. What we can control, you have to work on what you can control, and you can control those things. So going back to the core, I think it'll be almost automatic that, hey, I can help the underserved. I can spend a little bit more time to do what I can to take care of that community.
Welcome back to another episode of the podcast for doctors by doctors. I'm Dr. Michael Jerkins. Once again here solo. We have an interesting topic today, that one we actually haven't talked about a lot on this podcast, which is related to how and where physicians work. And there is a growing amount of us who are opting for varying looks and feels of our career. And for some, that's full-time employment. For some, that's ownership of a practice. But for more and more, there are people taking short-term contracts called locums in varying degrees. And that's what they do. That's what they work, and that's how they work. We have others, and I know a lot of these, who do work as an employee from a system, but also still work locums. I have lots of questions because today we're joined by someone who is an expert and a vascular surgeon who has been working locums for a long time, has lots of insights. We have lots of questions to go over and tips and tricks for those of you thinking or considering locums work, and really excited to talk to her. Lots of, I think, very practical insights coming our way. So without further ado, let's get to the interview. Today on the podcast for Doctors by Doctors, we're joined by Dr. Miechia Esco, who is a board-certified Locum Tenens vascular surgeon and chief medical resource advisor at locumtenens.com. Dr. Esco is licensed in 15 United States, which is pretty impressive, and territories, and has been practicing locums medicine for over a decade with a focus on delivering high-quality care to underserved communities. She has trained and practiced in various environments, including academia, military medicine, and private practice, holding expertise in vascular surgery and wound care pathologies. Over the course of her career, Dr. Esco has also been instrumental in the enhancement of vascular surgery service lines, helping connect more patients with the care that they need. Dr. Esco utilizes her unique expertise to positively impact the healthcare staffing industry and locum tenens medicine. She has been instrumental in helping advance clinicians, playing a key role in the launch of strategic technology initiatives and in enhancing the clinician and associate experience. Prior to her current role, Dr. Esco served as a consultative member on locumtenens.com's customer advisory board for several years. She also started her clinical career in private practice and is a former major in the United States Air Force. Dr. Esco earned a bachelor's degree in molecular biology from Hampton University and completed the MD PhD program in cell biology at Wayne State University. Her postgraduate training in general surgery was completed at the University of Massachusetts, thoracic surgery at Kessler Air Force Base, Biloxi Veterans Affairs Hospital, vascular surgery at the Detroit Medical Center, and Master of Business Administration at Brandeis University. Throughout her tenure, Dr. Esco has received various awards and was named National Staffing Employee of the Year by the American Staffing Association in 2023. That's amazing. She is a member of the American College of Surgeons, Society of Vascular Surgeons, and Sigma Chi Scientific Research Society. Dr. Esco, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. It's an honor. You know, you guys are infamous in our little circles, so this is a big deal.
Well, I'll take infamous, I guess, but I definitely think you're probably the most qualified doctor we've had on this podcast, and I am very happy you're here with us today. We have lots of questions. We have lots of people that have asked, as you can imagine, across the country on different ways that they practice medicine.
Sure.
And locums is a huge one that, quite frankly, if a lot of people listening are like me in residency, I didn't know anything about. I've never heard of it. I didn't know what it was. So I'd love to start with what do you think when physicians hear locum tenens, what is something that they typically don't understand or that they get wrong?
Unfortunately, I think a lot. They have no clue. So, just kind of to go back to understand what locums is, it's Latin for a placeholder. But it's more than that. It was actually started in the 1970s at the University of Utah. Have you been to Utah?
I have.
Yeah, it's beautiful, but there are a lot of areas that are completely rural. So in the 70s, at the University of Utah, two physicians got together and they said, well, we have our rural colleagues who are really having a hard time. They're burnt out. They're really small town docs. They work 24/7, 365, and they take care of everything. How can we alleviate that? So they came up with locum tenens. Ultimately, it was funded by the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, and it just kind of exploded from there. So when we come to kind of present time, some big myths, there are quite a few, but there are two I kind of want to touch on. One is that, if you're a locums physician, you're not competent, you don't know what you're doing, you can't get a job, and that couldn't be further from the truth. Actually, studies that we've done show that over 70% of locums physicians have almost 20 years or more of experience. They're highly adaptable, highly educated, well trained, and they're offered jobs continually, and people ask for them to come back to their facilities. The second big myth is about the financial aspect, and I really want to touch on this. One is that locum tenens physicians make tons of money, they make all of this money, but hour by hour, and then when you break down everything that these clinicians have to pay for, health insurance, retirement, things like that, that's a completely different bucket that money goes into. And then with health systems, they feel that the locum spend is so high that they can't afford it. But when you look at that versus, those care coverage gaps and lost billable revenue, I think you'd see that things are a lot different than they may appear on the surface.
Yeah, I think that's the questions I always hear. That makes total sense. I did not know the history in Utah. It's amazing. Is the financial question, which is, hey, I would love to go work in a place that's underserved or that needs me, but how do I handle things like medical malpractice and licensing? Can you walk us through what someone should expect if they were to say engage with like locumtenens.com and they found a job they wanted to go to in Indiana and they're not licensed there yet? How does that work?
It's kind of a process. It kind of varies depending on how much you're doing locums, but either way, especially with locumtenens.com, we help you get a license. The facilities, part of the negotiation is they cover your malpractice, so that's taken care of. Locumtenens.com and other locums agencies they typically cover your logistics, so they cover your travel, your hotel, and so that's taken care of. The other side of it, so you're there, everything's kind of taken care of, but you're responsible when you actually get your payment of what you do. So there are some tax implications because those are 1099, you're an independent contractor, and those earnings have to be reported to the IRS in a different way because you have to pay taxes. If you're doing it a significant amount, there are a number of ways that you can save for retirement with cash balance plans and other retirement buckets that are kind of tax-free, and that's all dependent upon how much you're making. It also depends on if you have an LLC, which I always recommend that if you're going to do locums, even if it's a short amount of time, you get an LLC, and then you're ultimately an employee of that LLC, and there's some calculations that we can go through another time that actually determine how much you're paid as your employee and retirement and tax implications for that.
Yes, I've heard of those strategies and know people that have used those, and some that I've learned the hard way because they got a bunch of 1099 money and then their tax bill came and they did not budget for that. So anyone listening that's interested in that, just make sure you have a plan from how you're handling that from a tax perspective. And the LLC kind of employed through your own LLC strategy, I think is catching on a lot across the industry, which is great. I'm all for empowering doctors even more.
Yeah, I think it's really important that you have a good team around you. I mean, physicians aren't typically taught business and finances, so it's critical that you have a great accountant, an attorney, a fiduciary, payroll company, et cetera, that can actually handle that. So it's on autopilot, so you don't get in trouble at the end of the year.
Yes. So I'd love to learn more because your experience is vast. And but it says now, like we talked about, you've been doing locums for over a decade now. Tell us how you started, what got you interested, and what's kept you going down this path.
I've done a lot. So I did the MD PhD program. So with that alone, you'd expect I'd go straight academic, just go hard academic medicine, which I thought would have been great. And so I finished that. I did, general surgery at UMass, and then my mentor at the time just happened to be an astronaut. It's just the craziest thing. And so I thought, oh, why don't I do that? Because why not? And so at that point, I joined the Air Force, and my intention was to go into the astronaut training program, but I was a third year general surgery resident. And anyone who knows general surgery residency, it's torture. So, and I was told, hey, if you leave, you have to start all over if you're not accepted. And a lot of decisions went into it, all the unknowns, so I didn't do that, but I was already in the Air Force. So then I decided to do thoracic surgery in the Air Force. I did a thoracic fellowship, and I was doing thoracic surgery in Mississippi. It was a little bit after Hurricane Katrina, so it was a very busy, interesting time. And then I decided, hey, I want to be a vascular surgeon. So why don't I just go back and do a full vascular fellowship? Well, why not, right? And so that's what I did in Detroit. And then I finished that. I went back to the Air Force for 2 years. And then when I was finishing my commitment, I was recruited to a small private practice. And I joined, but I found that kind of their moral compass was a little different than mine. So I said, well, what am I going to do? I was a little bit gun shy about joining another practice or doing anything. I kind of wanted to think about things and take a bit of a break. I mean, as you can imagine, all that I did up to that point. And so I was getting calls from locums recruiters, and they're like, hey, why don't you try it? I'm like, okay, I'll try it for a weekend. And that was almost 11, 12 years ago. It's rewarding. I have autonomy. I call it pure medicine because I literally go in, operate, and leave. And I don't do the administrative, meetings and all of those things. I'm able to just really take care of people, and it allows me to do, a myriad of other activities outside of that, which have been rewarding also. So that's kind of the 5 minute my life.
I love it. I have lots of questions. I can imagine you as a vascular fellow is just like maybe a better surgeon than maybe some of your attendings. Like you've already had so much training. I can't imagine what that was like.
Well, I'm pretty humble about it. I think everyone's got a skill and a talent. It's just kind of my groove, my sweet spot. But I learn a lot from everyone, and everyone has something. And when I say learn, and this is what people often mistake, I learned a lot. Some not good, of course, and some excellent. And the key with surgery is knowing how to get out of trouble and knowing how to problem solve and be 15 steps ahead. So, some of those attendings, they were able to do that even if I had training and the technical skill, but they had that decision making from the experience.
This is not on the script, but I'm very excited to ask you this because I had someone text me this clip this last week of Elon Musk saying that robots were going to replace all surgeons and you shouldn't go to medical school, which I think both of us have lots of strong feelings about that comment. But I am just a lowly med peds doctor. I am not a surgeon. You are someone with decades of experience, maybe the most trained person I've been around. How do you respond to that? Do you think that eventually, I know there's tons of robotics in surgery, but eventually, will robots actually replace surgeons?
No.
I don't think so either, but I'd love to hear your reasons.
There is I think maybe technically they could, if it's something straightforward. But what happens in the problem solving and in the actual act of surgery is an instinct that maybe in 100 years they'll be able to program a robot to have instinct about things or just a feeling or a vibe or thinking about the patient after, I don't know how you program that. I don't know how you program compassion. I don't know how you program the patience that it takes to do some of the really challenging things that we do. And the decision that has to be made. I mean, just because you can doesn't mean you should. And that can only come from a human.
And to your point, what made me think about it is you said a lot of it's learning how to get out of trouble. And if you're a robot and the infinite amount of possibilities that happens once you start the surgery versus what was planned beforehand makes you question a lot of how safe are you actually as a patient in that situation.
We're all technically the same. We all did gross anatomy. We all kind of have the idea, but you don't know until you get in. Sometimes people have really interesting anatomy, or there's, a branch here, things that you have to be prepared for in the moment. And how do you program that? I'm not sure.
As I think our anatomy professor used to say, they didn't read the book. Not everybody reads the book of their anatomy, so everyone's a little bit different. Um, So I'd love to go back. So you it sound like found your path, which sounds great. I also what is appealing to what you said is I loved not having to sit in administrative meetings, i.e. unpaid labor, which is great. And you really get to treat patients, which is what we all got into this for. But one thing I heard you touch on was going to places that were in need or underserved. Walk us through what that experience is like and what that's meant to you to have the opportunity to go to underserved areas and really bridge the gap.
I've been thinking about this term underserved, and I think it has a different definition now than it did 20 years ago, because there's underserved rural without resources, and there's inner city underserved with all of the resources. So there's kind of two different buckets. My experience has been with both. So I'll say in rural medicine, it's been really interesting because I'll give you an example, a story. I looked at a study or something. It was a CAT scan, and a patient had a critical finding, and I said, oh my gosh, we have to get this patient in right away. Couldn't find him, couldn't get a phone number. Finally tracked down their primary care physician, and they said, oh no, I usually bring him into town. He lives up in the mountains without running water, electricity, nothing, and usually once or twice a month, the primary care actually goes up to make sure he's okay, and if he needs to come down, he brings him down. And so that's a level of underserved, and the resources are there, but how do you take care of that patient? And then you have in the inner city where maybe somebody doesn't have transportation. They don't have, the financial means to get their medications filled. So kind of that span has been really eye-opening for me. It's really rewarding. I think to hear those stories, and when you make an impact in those rural areas especially, you're really taking care of the community. Because what you don't realize is, oh my goodness, you just helped the third grade teacher, which helps everybody. So it's a kind of a different connotation than in the city, but it's all really rewarding.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I also have worked in both settings and different needs for different populations. And I would love to hear your perspective, given your expertise on the current status of rural hospitals. Because I think that this is my opinion, is that a lot of folks who aren't in medicine, if they see a hospital, it's just like the next hospital down the road or the one they've heard about on TV, but it's just not the case with specialty coverage and things like that. And I saw something last year where something like a third of rural hospitals are on the financial brink. And the amount of access issues that's going to create for rural America seems really extreme, but you're seeing it boots on the ground. I would love to hear your perspective on the status of rural hospitals in America.
It's quite devastating, actually, because, and you're right, that same study that, a third of rural hospitals are closing. Many hospitals don't have that specialty care, and in some ways it's basic specialty care like OBGYN and cardiology. In my mind, some of those things are necessary. but seeing it firsthand where you have an area, let's say of 200 or 300 miles, and you have, one or two clinics and one hospital, and the hospital literally has 20 beds. If that closes, it's a catchment of, there's one particular place I'm thinking of, it's a catchment of almost 100,000 people who have no access to care. And you have to take a step back and say, well, how are we, serving our communities? How are we really taking care of each other if we're going to literally leave, hundreds of thousands of people without, basic care? The other thing that I've also found is in rural communities, the patients have a really hard time leaving for care. And even if they have the means, even if they have, if I could say, hey, I can get you 100 miles to a facility that can take care of you, leaving that town is like going to the moon. And so, and it's really, really challenging to tell someone, we need you to drive an hour. And it's terrifying for them because they've never been out of that town. So how do we become sensitive? How do we provide resources? I think one great thing is that we're, with technology and, the pandemic taught us that we can, do telemedicine quite effectively. And, maybe there's some things that Elon Musk can do to drop, more meds and, those type of resources into our communities with those robots. Maybe that'll help.
Sounds great. We'll welcome it. I'd love to get your perspective on health systems because I think that's where most physicians are, employed at this time, especially probably people listening.
Sure.
Does the word stability, sometimes I think the word stability is used by health systems to scare physicians away from locums, basically insinuating locums is too unstable. You don't want that. Stay here with us. You're safe. You're predictable. You know what your schedule is going to be like. How do you counter that?
Medicine isn't stable no matter where you are. It's not. I think in some ways locums is more stable because all the cards are on the table. We're going to give you X amount of money for these amount of days, and you have these responsibilities. And nothing after that is guaranteed because it's very delineated. What happens in traditional medicine often is you have the influx of mergers and acquisitions, you have hospital closures, which we just talked about. You have issues with regulation, reimbursements, increased demands and metrics that may be placed upon you and, those administrative burdens. So how can you keep up and how can you always say that that's stable when at any moment one of those factors can, literally hurt your career?
Yeah. Now, you mentioned earlier that a high percentage of locums physicians have a lot of experience. I'm curious, are you seeing a trend of earlier and earlier career physicians opting for this route?
Yes, we are. And it's because it's becoming well known and also just the demands of kind of that traditional course have made it more challenging. And we also have to look at the generational expectations of their lives and careers and how they want to spend their time, outside interest. When I did med school, and maybe you feel the same way, it was like you go to medical school and you go to residency and you get out and you hang a shingle and that's all you can do. It's like, okay, it was great. It was a great life, and it is a very great life. But now with the options, more and more people are saying, hey, let me take a look. There's a way I can do this and spend more time with my family and travel and, open a bakery or whatever it is. It gives that flexibility. And it does not dilute the quality of care. I think that's something that's really important to point out. Just because you're not doing it in a traditional sense doesn't mean that the quality is diminished in any way.
That makes sense. I can see that I think in general, the trend I've seen is earlier career physicians just trying to do things a little bit differently, saying, hey, at least how they practice or where they practice or doing locums or maybe going out and starting their own thing. It seems like there's growing energy and momentum at folks trying to take more control over how their career looks and feels. And I hope that the system responds and, you know, and accommodates so that doctors can only practice how they want to. I'll step off my soapbox.
I was going to give you another box to stand on.
Thank you. Yes, I definitely need one more. Um, but like, how do you, the other thing I've heard, and I think you already touched on this, which I love your response, is people talk about locums and contributing to care that doesn't have as much continuity in these systems. I have my own response, but I'd love to hear how you would counter those comments about locums.
About the continuity of care.
Hmm.
I mean, there's a reason why the locums physician is there is because otherwise there'd be a coverage gap, right? So, is it better to have someone there? It may not be the same person, but you have someone who's going to take care of you versus a complete gap in coverage where you have no one to take care of you. I think one thing that's really critical is that when hospital systems and environments, if they have the appropriate processes and policies and efficiencies, then that continuity isn't really missed of the person because there's always some type of overlap, whether it's with, you know, an APP, whether it's with, you know, whomever. Everyone kind of knows what's going on with the patient, and the EMR has made that possible too.
I'm curious because of your experience having probably gone to, I don't even know how many different systems to work. What are some tips and tricks on how you build trust really quickly with staff, you know, and patients and administration? How do you do that?
You have to be authentic. You just have to be who you are. You have to be calm when you come in. You can't come in with your hair on fire and erratic. You have to be honest, and you have to communicate and listen. And the other thing is you have to be have really high standards and have really strong confidence without ego. You have to come in, hey, this is what I do. I know what I'm doing. You know, I'm here to work as part of your team, regardless of the resources that may be available. And that goes a long way.
It makes sense. And not every doctor, unfortunately, has the humility that you do. And so I think that probably builds a lot of rapport with everybody stepping in with that type of angle. And given your experience with establishing and enhancing the vascular surgery gaps that exist in the places you've seen, what are most hospitals in your mind getting wrong about trying to grow and maintain specialty care?
They don't have the big picture. I think so. Say, for instance, with vascular, they may say, oh man, we can get this amount in reimbursements if we have this service line. But understanding the sheer amount of resources that it takes to build specialty service lines and resources meaning financial and human capital, the infrastructure, the regulatory requirements, and then also taking a step back and looking at the system overall. I think sometimes they don't look at how is this going to affect the entire hospital. So, for instance, with vascular surgery, by bringing vascular surgery in or having a robust service line, it affects everything. It affects the ICU, it affects the hospitalist, it affects the ER, volume radiology, cardiology. I mean, it can change a hospital's trauma designation. So I think sometimes systems don't look at it that comprehensively and realize that it's a heavy lift because you're going to need more than just a vascular surgeon. You may need, you know, 3 more hospitalists or and things like that. So it's a big picture thing that I think systems kind of lose.
Yeah, it's like they look at it under a column on an Excel and see a big top line revenue number and don't think about all the other implications. What you talked about several different specialties there. I'm curious, are you seeing trends on which specialties are growing and more demand in the locum space?
All of them. All of them.
That's an easy one.
All of them, and the reason why is because there's a physician shortage. I mean, that's a fact. It's a broad physician shortage. Of course, primary care is the most pressing, because we need you guys to help. That's kind of the front door of healthcare, and so we have a physician shortage across the board. We have the groups that are eligible for retirement, that number is growing, so they're leaving. So you have this vast amount of physicians that are out of the workforce. So we need them in the healthcare system just to kind of keep it running. The other reason is what we were talking about earlier, is that there's more interest. And wait a minute, there's a different way to practice, or an additional way, not a different, an additional way to practice medicine. So there's an increase in every specialty.
Yeah, I love hearing your perspective just with your experience, but also like your training. And one thing we mentioned was your MBA, and that's one thing I don't have. But a lot of doctor friends are like, "Hey, I'm thinking about getting my MBA." And I'm always interested to hear what was it that led you to pursue that extra training, and how do you think it's been applicable to your career so far?
What we were talking about before, I've been doing locums full time for a long time, and so I have my own business. And with that business, I do other consulting. I have my core work with locumtenens.com as their chief medical advisor. And medicine is a business. When I've gone to all of these facilities and I've talked to doctors and hospital administrators and people in the C-suite, it's a different world. And so in order to have more depth in my ability to maneuver in medicine, I needed to learn more. I needed to know more. And so I did the MBA, and it's opened doors so, I can be on both sides quite effectively.
Makes sense. One thing that I saw recently was, and I'm going to butcher where this was, I can't remember where, but that there was almost like a urology specialty fellowship they were offering to primary care doctors to have them know how to do simple, I think, urological procedures to fill this demand. How are you seeing training evolve to also fill in these gaps? I know locums obviously is doing it, but you're mentioning retirement of older physicians, more demand from existing patients, the existing shortage that's there. Are you seeing training evolve like the kind of urology program I mentioned at all?
Yeah, there are some of the primary care specialties that are being trained in some of the smaller procedural fields. For instance, with nephrology and what you were talking about with urology. And it's a necessity because there's a shortage, and the access to care. So, for instance, I gave you the example of in that rural community, if a patient has to drive 100 miles to see a urologist, or can their primary care take care of it, it's efficient, and it also saves, a significant amount of resources. So there is a trend towards that. I will say the specialists who've done 1,000 years of training have different feelings about it. It's like, well, I did 600 years of training and I was tortured. What are you talking about? But there's enough pathology to go around for everybody, and I think as physicians we kind of need to step back with our egos and just take care of people.
Yes, there's no shortage of people to take care of. So I 100% agree. And speaking of the shortage and amount of patients, just with your vast experience, and I'll keep saying that, but that's the best adjective I got, is what is an operational change that you see would make the biggest impact in access for underserved communities?
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's operational, kind of technical policy that you can write, but well, you can write. You'd be surprised how many healthcare entities don't have a mission. They don't have ethics, and they don't have a robust culture. You have those three things. I think you can really change how healthcare is delivered because everyone's on the same page. You need a strong culture to deliver compassionate care. You need a mission so you know which way we're going. What are we doing? What are our goals? Even if you want to look at it from a financial standpoint, if you're trying to get a grant, well, what's your mission? What are you doing? I don't know. So those things are critical. I think there are two other things is to really create safe environments for the patients and the physicians in order to carry out the Hippocratic Oath, what we do. And then do everything they can to protect that doctor-patient relationship. It's a very sacred relationship. It's a very sacred time, even if it's 3 minutes to say, whatever. Our patients trust us. So whatever a facility can do to protect that, have a mission and great culture, I think that can really shift a lot of what we're seeing in healthcare.
Yeah, that's interesting because I think normally when I think about that question, I think on the macro, big sweeping federal type changes, but there's a lot on the micro scale that seems like I could really move the needle as well. That makes a lot of sense. Have you in kind of your experience with the I guess the underserved communities, both in the rural and the urban, are you seeing I guess let me back up, let me re-ask that question. How would you encourage more doctors to get involved in trying to serve in underserved communities?
I think everyone now in medicine is serving the underserved. I really do. I think I was just talking about the Hippocratic Oath, right? And that's what we signed up for when we were, first year medical students, and you get your code and you go through your oath and you commit yourself to something. And I think kind of going back to the fundamentals, and the reason why my previous answer about culture and mission and ethics, kind of the micro softer things, and then this answer about going back to the core of the Hippocratic Oath is because there's so much changing in medicine. There's so much instability with global economic factors and regulatory things. What we can control, you have to work on what you can control, and you can control those things. So going back to the core, I think it'll be almost automatic that, hey, I can help the underserved. I can spend a little bit more time to do what I can to take care of that community.
Makes sense. Do you think you work more with physicians assistants and nurse practitioners in the locum setting than in the permanent staffing models?
I think there's an increase in APPs in the locum space for sure. But traditionally, the traditional setting, there's more APPs and PAs. But for instance, with LT.com, we have a segment where, we have APPs, an APP segment that do locums work. So it's increasing for sure.
Makes sense. And we talked about this a few times already, but meaning and establishing a relationship with patients, and that is sacred. I think it's an appropriate word. How do you really build a meaningful legacy without staying in one place clinically?
Yeah. So legacy, when you think about legacy, the definition doesn't give a time. Legacy is about the impact you make and how you're remembered. So that can happen in 3 minutes. You can walk in and have an incredible impact and you'll be remembered. And that's legacy. And I say that and not to be boastful, but I've gone to places and spent a week, and a year or two later, I may get a call from one of the nurses and like, hey, Dr. Esco, how's it going? Mr. Jones was in today and he asked when you were coming back. And I've had instances where I've actually had patients follow me to a different state so I can continue care. And I've only spent a short amount of time. So legacy isn't about time. It's about your intention in the moment. and your connection with the patient and high quality, compassionate care. I think you do those things and you stay up to date in your craft and you're excellent at it, then legacy can be created in minutes.
I love that too because you're also, like you said at the very beginning, focusing on just like pure medicine. You're not, you don't have all of the bureaucratic things you gotta worry about and navigate. It's literally you and the patient and trying your best to deliver excellent care. I love that. That seems like now you're selling me on locums. I might go sign up.
I have somebody you can call, so just,
Okay, good. Locumtenens.com. Got it. This is a question I get from especially early career attendings is how can you build optionality in your career without burning bridges?
have you seen that there's a cartoon of a bird? It's like a close up of a bird and he's holding on to the cage. And then when you zoom out, he's just holding on to just a little section of a cage. There's no cage around him.
I've not seen that, but I can imagine it. I love that.
So you have to decide, okay, am I in this cage? No, you're not in the cage. You have options. And the key is this. You have to have high integrity. You have to be excellent in your craft. You have to be authentic and honest. And you're not going to burn bridges. That's a reality because medicine is so dynamic now. If we were having this conversation 50 years ago, maybe I would say, oh my gosh, no. But we know that that's not the case. So if a young physician says, hey, I'm great at what I do, I have great relationships with my colleagues and, my bosses or the chief of whatever, and I'm being true to myself and being authentic and taking care of the patients, then I don't see why someone couldn't say, hey, I want to go and do XYZ and maybe I'll come back. And they'll want you to come back. Everyone's looking for high quality physicians and clinicians, and everyone is. So if you're that, then you don't have to worry about burning a bridge. If you're a disaster, you're lighting the bridge on your way out. So
That's right. That's exactly right. I think a lot of the times it's just doctors, we underestimate how much we're worth to the systems and places we're at. So we're almost, it's like ingrained in us. I don't know if it's from school and residency and fellowship that we're just maybe undervalued, but like to your point, like they don't want you to go and they want you to come back if you do go. They don't want to burn the bridge themselves. So it goes back to, I think, doctors perpetually undervaluing ourselves, which when you really step back and with especially your type of experience and administrative experience, understand the value that one physician brings to a system. If you really knew that, I think you would have a little more ability to kind of take control over how you are able to deliver excellent care. At least that's my opinion. I'm on another soapbox. Sorry.
no, I gave you another one. It's fine. But you know what? You know what I would encourage everyone. If you're in if you've been in a system for a while and you have a relationship with the C-suite, or even if you don't, just say, hey, can you give me my billable revenue for the last 6 months? Just, I'm paid $50. Hey, that's cool. But just give me my billable revenue. So you're telling me that I've contributed $1 million to the revenue. Hey, you know what? I am valuable to you. It gives you leverage. It gives you power, and then it lets them know, like, man, they know I'm giving them $50. They've billed $1 million. And then if you want to say, hey, I'd like to do XYZ, then it gives you that option. But, a lot of physicians, we don't know the business side. We don't know the financial side of what's going on in the big picture. And you'll probably get pushbacks. Most of the time you won't even get it, but it's worth asking.
The fact that they even now know that you kind of know is enough, even if they don't actually give you the revenue themselves.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, yeah.
I love that. I hope that's the clip that we post. I love that. Anything that empowers us to have more information. It's just so crazy how much information the systems and payers and everybody has, and how little that we individually have as doctors and get taken advantage of, unfortunately, in my opinion. And I love that tip. We're going to highlight that one for sure. Um, all right, so we have some true and false statements. So I will say a statement, and you will tell me if you think it is true or if it is false. They're supposed to be rapid fire, but they're almost never rapid.
Okay. Can I just tell you one thing?
Yes, please.
There is a study, I'll send it to you. It is, in all my free time, I was reading the Administrative Scientific Quarterly, and it was from 2009. And there were these social scientists. When I say it's like the best article in the world, it was about zookeepers. Hang with me, zookeepers. And what these social scientists did, they went to like 150 zoos across the US and they interviewed like 1,000 zookeepers. And they're like, and the article was like something, Call of the Wild, the double-edged sword of, um, of a calling, of a meaningful career. And what they found is the zookeepers said, it's a calling for me to take care of these animals. I'm going to do everything I can to take care of the animals. Self-sacrifice, staying late, hot environments, all of these things. But the zoo does not value me. I hold the zoo to a high moral standard, just like they hold me to a high moral standard, how I hold myself to a high moral standard. But the zoo needs to have that same level of commitment. And when there's a disconnect, the zookeepers become disenchanted. So when you have that corollary with physicians and systems and zookeepers and the zoo, when you look at the zoo, you're like, of course, the zoo should have great snacks and air conditioning for the lions and all of these things and make sure the zookeepers have good boots. But when it comes to physicians, it's like, oh, you're supposed to suffer. You don't need good snacks in the lounge, you know? So it's really interesting that there is a double-edged sword because you suffer in an environment that may not value you, and it's not okay.
Yeah, I love that, and I that resonates with me. It's almost like doctors, you are asking for too much. Like this is all about the patients. How dare you try to make sure your call schedule is tolerable, or how
You
dare
don't want
you that you get a 45-minute break to actually be able to sit down during the day. Um, it is that, and I don't know. I've wondered a lot, like, why does that happen? Why do systems act that way? And I think it, to me, my theory is it's just inertia. They're under a lot of pressure. And so there's just this dehumanization of the provider, and you're just another number in Excel. But it's very demeaning, unfortunately.
it is. It is. And I think people would be mortified if they knew that was going on at the zoo, right? They'd be mortified. You're treating the zookeepers how, but when it happens to physicians, it's I don't know, it's different.
Yes, totally agree. Well, actually, it goes fairly well with my first true and false statement. All right, you ready? Okay, so true or false? On average, physicians who work locums experience less burnout than those who do not.
Yes, if you do it right. True. If you do it right,
What does that mean? What does right mean?
you create your own schedule. You work as much as you want, you work as little as you want. You make as much money as you want, you make as little as you want. But if you work like a maniac in locums, it's just like working, full time somewhere. So you have to be able to say, okay, this is what I want to do. This is how much time I want to have. This is the lifestyle I want, and balance that. So if you're doing it right, you're balancing it. If you're going extreme, you're going to get burned out.
What is full time? Like, so let's say I don't have an employed contract as a physician and I'm doing locums regularly. Is there an average amount of shifts that you guys see that the average physician works in locums?
Well, full time could be that's your only job as a physician, your only source of income. But it's typically a third to half of your time.
Okay, a third to half of like working time, I guess. Is that how you would measure that?
Yeah, so at a minimum. So, 14, for instance, I work 10 to 14 days a month, give or take. Usually give.
Okay. But that's duly noted, though. Like if you do it right, it actually could give you more autonomy and less burnout.
Absolutely.
All right, true or false? Our health system relies heavily on locums physicians.
True.
I think people don't realize that, right?
Over 90% of healthcare facilities have had some type of contract or had locums in the last few years. 90%. And a lot of healthcare entities don't have solid, actionable, strategic staffing plans. And so these emergencies come up, or something comes up, or, you know, some physician's going to retire, and there's no real strategic plan if that happens. So locums are absolutely critical for that. And then what we were talking about with the physician shortage, you know, those facts, it's going to be, you know, almost 100,000 physicians short by 2036. We talked about the baby boomers. It literally takes an act of Congress to get more training programs. There are some medical schools that are opening. And until that supply demand is leveled out, there's always going to be a need for locums.
I have a lot of thoughts on the supply side, especially given the new student loan borrowing caps of $50,000 a year. I think there's going to be a big wake up call the next year or two as students drop out because they can't actually afford to pay for school. And then shrinking the pipeline of physicians is probably not in anyone's best interest. So that will be interesting to see how we react to that. All right, the next true or false. We touched a little bit on this, but I'm going to say it anyway. With AI, there will be less demand for physician services in the future. True or false?
I think it's no. I think that things will be more efficient. I think things may be more efficient. And I think processes and will be more streamlined. That's what I'll say.
I agree. I think there'll be an increased demand. If I just anecdotally look at my chart messages and the ones that ask me about their direct to consumer lab results that had 200 labs and they have questions about, or the wearables that show potential arrhythmia, like you're going to have more and more people with access to more and more data, but ultimately, what are they going to do with it? They're going to then go into the healthcare system and try to figure out what they need.
Absolutely.
So if anything, it adds to the demand, I think, and potential utilization. Hopefully, it makes things more efficient so we can see all those patients.
I agree.
Who knows? All right, true or false, our last one. Rural hospitals need locums physicians more than urban hospitals.
I think some of the specialty care, but maybe need it more in the rural hospitals because of saturation of specialists in urban areas. At one point, to give you an example, at one point for instance, for vascular surgery, in the state, in Manhattan alone, at one point in time, there were like, say, 100 vascular surgeons in Manhattan, in the area. And in the state of West Virginia, there were less than 10. So looking at the pathology, looking at, healthcare trends and seeing, the illnesses in certain regions, as I think specialty care is needed in those rural places. And part of it is because we have APPs that, as you know, in your field, APPs provide a lot of primary care, and especially in rural areas.
Absolutely. And where I work as well. That was awesome. Thank you. We have a closing question we ask every single guest. And it is, it's because we get so much information all the time. I always wonder, does this reinforce what we already think, or does it actually cause us to think? But the question is, what is one thing that you've recently changed your mind about?
I wouldn't say change my mind, but I'm evolving. I'm an evolutionary species at this moment.
Okay, I love it.
And that is, I don't have to do it all. And perfection does not exist. Perfection is a moving target. So I'm evolving to the change that those don't exist.
I love it. And like you said, you're a lifelong learner, as evidenced by all of your experience and how you continue to contribute to the field. Dr. Esco, thank you so much for your time. This has been wonderful. Can you give the listeners and anybody visibility on where they can find more about you or more about Locum Tenens?
You can go to locumtenens.com and find everything you need about locum tenens, from, possible career options, openings, to more about the field. There's some videos of me and things like that, but I don't have social media. I stay pretty isolated, and I'm busy.
You're busy. You're too busy for that. I love it. Well, Dr. Esco, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Be well.
Thanks for joining us this episode, and you can catch the podcast for Doctors by Doctors on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, and all the other major podcasting platforms. If you enjoyed this episode or learned anything here today, please take a moment to give us a rating and subscribe so that you don't miss a single episode release. To submit topic suggestions or guest suggestions or questions, you can reach us at podcast@panaceafinancial.com. As always, thanks for listening, and the next time you see a doctor, maybe you should prescribe them this podcast. See you next time.